Today, we're going to be going through and doing a little discussion. Looks like Saturday night, Dera had on Saturday night, Dera, the streamer, if y'all know who that is, I'll make sure and put a link to his Twitch in the video description. Did basically a stream where he played some games and had a discussion with Tian Ding, who, I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. Really nice guy. He also has responded to a couple of my questions on Twitter. He's one of the data analysts for Second Dinner. So he basically looks at the numbers from the Snap, from Marvel Snap, and sort of looks at everything that's going on and makes determinations based on data. What's the best decks? What's the best performing cards? All that stuff. So he's the one who kind of helps them track what what is going on in the game, make sure that nothing is too broken or too oppressive, et cetera, et cetera. So while he was on the stream with Dara, they went over and had some discussions on stuff that I wanted to kind of talk about my thoughts on. So let's go ahead and scroll down and go start getting into it. So there was kind of an interesting discussion right at the beginning. And I actually, and real quick, before I get too deep into this, shout out to Blue Train. He's a really nice guy. He actually came into my stream while I was doing I recorded this originally on stream and the VOD was unusable. So I'm re-recording it now locally without, not on stream to see if I can get a better quality video. But basically he went through or was here while I was going over it and sort of like gave me a little bit of input and all that stuff and talked about it. He's a really nice guy. Go shoot him a follow on Twitter. Show him some love because he's gotten a lot of very annoying people kind of getting on his case about this on Twitter. So I really appreciated him doing this because I did not know this was happening and did not actually get to watch it live. So without him, I would never have known any of this. But I thought there was enough interesting stuff in this discussion they had to sort of go over it and give you guys my thoughts on everything. So first thing, Dara asked him what the best cards were in Marvel Snap based on the data. And turns out the best card at high MMR, so we're talking like 90 up through infinite, is Sauron. Sauron is the 3 power, 3 energy, 3 power minion that negates all the ongoing effects of cards in your deck. So obviously you don't use this with good ongoing effects. You use this with the bad ones on cards that are overstated to get those overstated cards without any downside. Pretty sweet card. I actually really love the design of this card. And turns out it's actually apparently very good. Shuri Zero is one of the best decks in the game right now. And even though a lot of the popular lists right now are not using this card specifically, it turns out that it looks like they probably should. They should just be running the Sauron version of this deck because it is performing very, very well at high MMR. Next up, he asked them what the overall best card was because he admitted that the data is very small on Sauron because there's not as many people who have it because it is still a Series 5 card. So they kind of discussed what's the best overall card in Marvel Snap right now, and it's actually Red Skull, which Dara then made the point. Well, doesn't that mean really the best card is Shuri? And we're going to get to that in a minute. I actually agree with that take. But the best performing card right now is Red Skull. Again, most likely because of Shuri. You play Shuri, you play Red Skull. It's 30 power. That wins you a lane all by itself. Makes it a pretty good card. Other thing they talked about is what are some of the other best cards performing right now in Snap. And it turns out Thanos, Quinjet, and Lockjaw are 3 of the next best performing cards. Anybody who's played this deck, which I would argue I've probably played more of this deck than anyone in the entire world. I'm not exaggerating on that. I've been playing Thanos, Quinjet, Lockjaw basically since I unlocked Thanos, since I unlocked Quinjet. That has been the deck I've played. I've played it to Infinite 2 months in a row. And even at Infinite, I play a ton of games with it just because I think it's very fun, very flexible, very powerful. So turns out that the 2 decks that everyone thinks are probably the best decks are the 2 best performing decks because you got cards from Shuri and you've got cards from Thanos Lockjaw that are just very overperforming. This does not surprise me at all. I think anybody who plays a lot of Snap, especially at a high level like I do, knows that these cards are very, very all right. Tian did note that Thanos is very good post buff, and he regrets not pinning it power to the buff to make sure he got it. Thanos is an insane card. I think all things said about Shuri, Thanos gets to do make crazy giant boards too, but also just play Shang-Chi and has an easier time finding it because of all the stones. It's so weird how people initially thought the stones would make your deck more inconsistent, and it turns out that's just really not true. All it does is just make sure you have more leeway to find the stuff you need because you have all this extra draw, all these free stones that really just add power, help you fill up your lanes. And at the same time, when you have Lockjaw, get to just cycle you to all of your powerful game-ending, game-breaking effects. So just very good cards. Does not surprise me at all to see these two decks be the two best performing. All right. The next thing he kind of talked about was Shuri, and this was the point where I got kind of a little. He lost me a little bit. He was talking about how Shuri is not one of the top performing cards right now, and is not what they view as a power outlier, and is not something they're looking at nerfing anytime soon. So I have a few issues with this. One, you look back up here at the first tweet we just talked about. Best card at high MMR is Sauron. Best card overall is Red Skull. These two cards, I have never seen a list running Sauron and Red Skull without Shuri in it. Because Sauron may be good. He does, he activates your Ebony Maw if you draw it later. He activates your Red Skull and your Typhoid Mary, which a lot of people don't even run anymore because Red Skull and all that other stuff is just better. She-Hulk and Arrow on turn 6 is just better. The one constant with the decks that run these two cards is Shuri. Shuri is what enables these cards. And he even said, well, the data is probably skewed because sometimes you draw Shuri, but you don't draw your big card with it to buff. And this is true. This is true. But the amount of games that I've won personally going turn 4 Shuri, turn 5 Red Skull, turn 6 copy Red Skull or Arnim Zola, like where I did nothing else that entire game. And because my opponent didn't have Shang-Chi or Arrow to mess up the last couple turns, they just lost. And it literally didn't matter what else they did. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's kind of, I think, problematic how oppressive that strategy is, how consistent it is. Because even if you're only getting like a 20 power She-Hulk and an Arrow on the last turn to make sure they can't contest you in those lanes, that's still just really broken and really hard for most decks to keep up with. So I don't really love the take that Shuri is not a problem card. I think Shuri is a problem card. I think you push Shuri to 5 and that card has absolutely no issues whatsoever. It still enables some really cool turn 6s. You can play it in a deck with Magic and try and set up a little bit bigger play that way. But the problem with Shuri is that you go turn 4 Shuri, turn 5 make a big thing, and then you have your whole turn 6 to copy it, contest the board, use your own arrows and stuff to defend your big minions, Cosmo, the armor. All these things are things you can play that just make it really, 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 really difficult for your opponents to do anything about what you're doing. And that to me is problematic. It's just a little too efficient and good at what it does. So hopefully they come around on this. I think there's got to be, it concerns me a little bit about their data analysis. If they're looking at these cards and saying, oh, hey, Shuri's not a problem, look at the data, but then they have Red Skull and Sauron as their two top performing cards when they're only in the deck because of Shuri. Anyway, I don't know. It concerns me a little bit, the whole thought process there, how they're getting to their conclusions and not seeing that Shuri is the actual problem. The next thing they talked about was Dera asked if Arrow was seen as a problem internally, and they said they are keeping a very close eye on it, but they wouldn't say it's a problem. It's just a very, very good card. And funnily enough, I actually agree with this take. A lot of people hate Arrow, think it's broken, think it's a problem, hate playing against it. There's games where you just lose because they had Arrow and there's nothing you can do about it. You just lose to Arrow. I love playing Galactus, and the number of times where you have to just be like, well, I'm going to play Galactus, hope they don't have Arrow, and get your Galactus arrowed into the wrong lane is more than I can, honestly calculate. So I do get it, but I think this is a case of people letting their emotions get in the way of the actual analysis of the card. For example, as good as Arrow is in the Shuri deck, that deck is literally unbeatable right now if we don't have Arrow to mess up where they play their cards on the turns 5 and 6. A lot of times you can set up like an Arrow play to yank their big thing on turn 5, kill it, and on the next turn, whereas they were going to play it behind an Armor or a Cosmo, and the only way you win is arrowing it away. Stuff like that comes up a lot. We need cards like this in the game. They need to be good, right? So if they make Arrow like a 5/3, no one's going to play Arrow, right? Like it's going to be very rare that you see an Arrow played if she loses her power, because sometimes it is relevant. You need that extra power to win a lane. I think Arrow is a necessary evil. I would even go as far as to say that. Like I don't love playing against her all the time, but I'm happy knowing that she prevents things like Galactus, Shuri, those sort of things from just running rampant over the metagame. So I kind of agree with this take. The other thing they talked about kind of for a little bit was Mr. Negative and how it limits design space. I think it's a really interesting problem that they have with Mr. Negative, right? They can nerf him again, make him cost 5. I think he's unplayable at 5. He would never ever see play. I think the better answer to Mr. Negative, honestly, and this is probably something that they don't want to do, but I think it probably just needs a rework. Maybe make it only affect the cards in your hand, so it's kind of almost plays like a Sarah type of effect. You go turn 5, Mr. Negative, make your whole hand flipped. Turn 6, you get to go crazy, that sort of thing. I think right now, as long as they keep printing new cards that have really high cost and really low power because of their effects, he, he's going to be a problem. And it's really, really hard to not, like basically, are you going to, for the rest of the existence of Marvel Snap, are you going to not print cards that are really powerful, that have really low power on them, at really high energy cost? Because as long as you keep printing those, like he's gonna, he gets more and more and more and more powerful. Eventually, it's gonna get to the point where there's that critical mass again, and it's gonna just be the best deck, and they're gonna have to nerf something again. But it's like, but what do you nerf? And it also makes changing other cards difficult, right? So you've got things like Mephisto, who has been data mined. We're not sure exactly if this is going to be the final card, but currently, as he stands, he's a 6 power or 6 energy, 0 power card that says if you win, double the amount of cubes you win. Not very good, if you ask me, just on a base rate. However, Mr. Negative makes that a 0 energy, 6 power card for the last turn. And that's crazy that you get that bonus effect, but for 0 energy, just a free 6 power to any lane that you need it on. And that's just going to keep happening. As long as we have Negative around, they're going to keep having to kind of think about that in the back of their heads. It's like, oh, well, it's like Surfer, right? It's like they were like, oh, we had to add power to Surfer, and they were like lamenting that disappointed them, that now you can't play it as effectively in a Negative deck. And I'm like, no, that's good. Like, it's a double nerf because we needed that, because a 0 power or a 0 energy Silver Surfer should not be a thing that we see all the time. It's just not good for the game, in my opinion, and that's going to continue to be a problem for the life of the game. He's not performing well right now. That's actually something they talk about in the next tweet down. We look ahead a little bit. Mr. Negative is bad on both ends currently, both in cubes that you win and average win rate. To me, that's just a matter of time, because you have Zabu now. You can go Zabu on 2, Negative on 3. So now you have both Psylocke and Zabu as 2 ways to cheat out Negative early that you can play, both of which have, Zabu doesn't really have synergy with Negative, but Psylocke does. If you draw it after Negative, it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, there's better cards that you would rather draw, but it's still not the worst thing in the world. It just makes it really, really, really hard for them to balance, because you're constantly having to think about balancing around the Mr. Negative effect. So I thought that was an interesting conversation, and it's something that I've talked about a lot with people that I play the game with. It's just Negative is going to be a problem in this game for the eternity that it exists, right? Like, they nerfed Sarah. Sarah was a 5 power, 5 energy card. Now she's a 4 power, 5 energy card. And guess what? People started playing her in Negative because you could curve her out a turn early with Negative on it, with the negative effect on her. You just get her out even earlier, and it makes all of your already cards that have been flipped even better. So I don't know. I think Mr. Negative is a very interesting card. I think it's fun that it's in the game. I just think at some point that might be something they have to think about changing. So we'll see. We got Snap is still a very young game, so maybe I end up being wrong, but I really don't think I am. It's a very powerful effect. So on to the next tweet. Something else they talked about is cards that currently have a very low win rate, less than 50%, but actually have a very good cube return, meaning you may only win 40% of your games, but on average per game, you're still getting a positive cube win rate, which is, I think, one of the cooler facets of Marvel Snap that a lot of other games, like basically no other games, really have, is this idea that you don't have to play a deck that wins more than 50% of its games, as long as you know how to play and you can get a positive cube return on the games you do win. So some of the cards they listed: Null, Hela, Doc Ock, Death, Wave. I'm surprised not to see Galactus on this. I feel like Galactus is also a card that probably is pretty close to being on this list. Maybe Galactus doesn't have a positive Q win rate. That's the only thing I could think of, is you don't always win when you play Galactus. And a lot of times when you play Galactus, they immediately leave, and then you just get the 1 cube. So maybe that's why Galactus doesn't quite make the list. But from my experience as a season, watching both myself play it and watching seasoned people play Galactus, if you snap at the right times, you should always be getting positive cubes off of your Galactus wins, not 1. So interesting to see that not on here. The other card I thought was very interesting to see on this list, the only one to me that didn't really make a ton of sense, was Death. But I guess there's a lot of times you draw Death and you just never get the player because you don't have enough things destroyed in order to play her. A lot of times, especially in Galactus decks, right? So this whole list is almost Galactus. Like Hella's another perfect example. When you don't have the Invisible Woman draws, Hella almost never works. When you have the Invisible Woman draws, Hella's amazing. So you play Invisible Woman, you play the stuff behind it, you snap super early, you get your 2 to 4 cubes, maybe 8 if you're lucky. You know, that's great. And then the games where you have Hella but you don't have Invisible Woman, you discard, or you just get the leave and you only lose 1 cube. So I think it's interesting that decks like this exist. I hope this is something that continues. I hope the metagame doesn't get so warped that it becomes impossible to play these decks and get cubes, because I really do love this part of the cube design for the game. It's just really, really cool. They did go over the top 5 worst cards. It looks like Blue either missed one of them or they only touched on 4. But the 4 that Tian listed were Crystal, Agatha, Magic, and Hawkeye. All of these make sense to me. Crystal, everyone knows, is garbage tier. It's probably the worst card in the game. It's just never good. And even when you can play it to use the effect, like, it's very rare that you can play it on 4 and net cards. It's always you losing cards. So not a good card. Agatha, we all know, is a meme. Agatha's just for fun. You don't really win a lot of games with Agatha. You do it for the highlights and for the fun of it. It's kind of a cool deck to play. It's just not very good. Magic surprises me, because there's been quite a few decks, negative being one of the ones that I would list, where Magic is just very, very good in that deck. It gives you more time to draw cards. It gives you an extra turn to set up stuff. It lets you figure out your combos. Magic to me seems like a card that usually when it's played, it probably leads to more wins than losses, but I'm clearly wrong, because by the numbers, it's not performing that way. So that surprised me a little bit. Hawkeye, not surprised. It's just the worst Ant-Man, a worse Ant-Man that it's more restrictive, right? So it's really hard to make Hawkeye good when there's just almost strictly better cards at the same cost. Like, who's ever going to run Hawkeye when you have Sunspot, Ant-Man, all these other, like, this Infinity Stones? If you really want 1-drops, just run Thanos. You get 6 of them. And they're all really good and they all cycle. So why are you ever going to run Hawkeye? So that doesn't surprise me to see on there. The only one, like I said, the only card on that's really surprised me was Magic. All right. Next up, they talked about best decks. Again, Thanos and Red Skull, they called it. Red Skull are among the best decks. I don't know why they insist on calling it the Red Skull deck. Red Skull didn't see any play basically until, Shuri. Because 0 Red Skull is not good enough on its own. It's good, but it's not good enough on its own. You needed that power boost, and Shuri gave it to him, and that made that deck broken. So I'm, again, not sure why he kept referring to it as Red Skull. It's a Shuri deck that runs Red Skull, not a Red Skull deck that runs Shuri. It's just not, right? But I do agree that those are the 2 best decks in the game. He posted a ton of lists. I don't know if you saw them. There's a bunch of them up here that he posted. I actually will have videos coming out this week showcasing some of these lists, a bunch of different Thanos lists. Down here, you've got some more, which we're going to get to in a minute, some more interesting decks that are a little off meta, off beat. I actually tried this deck out. It felt super fun, super flexible, pretty good. So look forward to that. If you guys kind of want to see some more content about what was discussed, I think it's really cool kind of getting their data and seeing what decks they see that are performing as better than or higher than you would expect, sort of stuff. So really, really cool. Look forward to that. There will be a video coming out on that this week. I'm not sure exactly when yet, but probably Thursday or Friday. Anyway, back to the conversation at hand. They kind of go over different decks that are either over or underperforming. The deck they said that has the highest play rate but the lowest cube average and win rate average is the Professor X Daredevil style control decks. I totally get this. Playing with Daredevil and Professor X is fun. And when you don't have Daredevil and just guess and hit the correct lane with Professor X, is one of the best feelings in the world, especially playing or one of the best feelings playing this game. But it just doesn't line up that way most of the time. It's really hard to get positive win rate and cube rate with that deck. It is very fun though. Daredevil's an awesome card. Galactus, they said, has a negative win rate but a positive Q rate. So here, this is kind of what I was just talking about earlier. Galactus, I think, is in a very healthy spot because it's very easy to counter. So if you know your opponent's playing a Galactus deck and they go wave on 3, you need to play your Arrow, or you need to play your Polaris to pull a 3-drop into the empty lane, or you need to play whatever it may be. Magneto also screws them up if they have, because they have the wave on board. So you just pull wave over to where you think they're going to play it. It has a lot of very easy and interesting and highly played counterplay. But when you win, it's spectacular. It's fun. He's got a really cool animation. He feels really good to play with. I think Galactus is in a really healthy spot. I thought when I first got him, like I played against him and I was like, oh, this deck seems so toxic. But you don't think about all the times where I'm playing my Thanos deck and I arrow their Galactus right into the lane with that they have stuff on and they just lose. That, you know, you remember the games where they got you, where you forgot to play around it and they have it, or you play around it and they're a different deck. That's my least favorite. When they arrow you and they're just the Electro Ramp deck and you're like, oh, screw, forget this. Now I lose because I arrowed and it did nothing. But I think it's healthy to have that. I think it's healthy to have these types of decks that, you know, have these really cool, spectacular, fun to play finishes, but you don't necessarily want them to be the best deck and around everywhere and everyone playing them. So I think Galactus is in a really good spot. Sandman, Wave, they talked about that deck. So I mean, Electro Ramp, right? Like you don't play Wave Sandman without Electro and kind of the package that goes with it normally, I don't think. So those decks and then generic Lockjaw are also doing really well. Zabu is still performing pretty well. That was good to hear because from my experience, he seemed pretty good still, but there hasn't just been that many decks at my play rank that are playing him. So I was kind of wondering if he was still doing all right, but turns out he is. I'm happy to see it. I think that's one of the best nerfs they could have done is that instead of completely like just killing the card, they kind of made it different. It's good, but different. It's not broken. It's just, it gives you a little bit of flexibility, lets you play a couple extra 4-drops in a game over the course of 4 turns instead of letting you play an extra 4-drop every turn and then 2 extra on 6. It's just like, oh, well, you know, on 5, you can play a 4-drop and a 2-drop, or you can play, you know, a 4-drop and a 1-drop on turn 4. You know, all these little things. You can play a 4-drop on turn 3. It's like a incremental advantage instead of like this big, powerful, ridiculously broken, like, oh, they snapped on 2. They probably have Zabu. I should probably retreat, sort of thing. So I think Zabu's in a good spot. Glad to hear that he's still performing pretty well. I did want to talk about this because I feel like I have a pretty good perspective on Thanos, given how much I've played it since it came out. They said the Thanos win rate increased a lot post buff. So for those of you who don't know, Thanos went from being a 6'8" to now he's a 6'11". Not technically, in all technical terms, it is a buff, but from my experience, it's like half the games it's good, and half the games that just means you have something that can get Shang-Chi'd, and that's kind of annoying. But I like really prefer the Lockjaw version that doesn't run like Marvel and all that stuff. I prefer the Lockjaw version that's Magneto, Arrow, Devil Dino, all the big stuff. So you have Shang-Chi targets anyway. So it is unfortunate, but whatever. It does take away the cool kind of counterplay where you play Thanos on turn early, like on turn 5, and then on turn 6, when you don't have priority, you play the Power Stone somewhere else for free because you have Quinjet out, and then suddenly you get an 18 power Thanos instead of an 8, but they couldn't Shang-Chi it because they had priority, and they don't get to hit it until it's too late. So it takes that line of play away. So it's not directly just a buff. I think the reason the win rate has increased with Thanos is because of that tournament. We had the tournament that Harry won with the Thanos deck. I've seen that version of the deck freaking everywhere, and it's a good deck. And Thanos has always been a good card, but now people are playing with it and people are learning the deck. Maybe people who had Thanos are like, oh, I can't find a deck I like that works with them, whatever. Now suddenly they have this deck they can play that's just really, really good. They know it's good. They play with it, and that increased the win rate more than the buff did, in my opinion. Because honestly, the buff hurts as much as it helps sometimes because of Shang-Chi being around everywhere because of the Shuri decks. So next point on the that they kind of went over was talking about Sarah Control, and his bullet point here is Sarah Control is a very mid deck. Like, yes, I think Sarah Control is the definition of like a mid-tier deck. It does the thing it does pretty well, but it doesn't do anything broken. It doesn't do anything unfair. Like, yeah, when they play Sarah on 5, they have a really good turn 6, but they're always behind at that point, so they have to have a really, really good turn 6. So sometimes they can. You know, that's how that deck is designed. It's designed to throw priority. So, you know, there are times that works out, but then there's times where it doesn't. It's a deck that you have to both learn to play extremely proficiently, and you also have to, like, your opponents have to, you know, sort of allow you to do your thing. There's a lot of things in the meta right now that sort of counter what you're trying to do. You got Cosmo. Cosmo is awful for that deck. You've got Armor. Armor makes it really hard to set up your Shang-Chi turns. You're not running Arrow, so like you can get arrowed, but you can't arrow them back. Like there's a lot of things that play into to making this deck a lot harder to play than some of the other top tier decks. He did say other decks were featured, but the stat criteria were not clear, and there was less formal but interesting. Other decks were featured, but the stat criteria was not clear, so we're not gonna worry about that. Um, they featured some lists for Galactus, Salmon, and Move. I actually thought, let me see it. This Galactus list is really, really interesting in my opinion. I love the look of it. I love the lizard and the cloak and stuff early to have some big statted minions to kind of get priority. The thing I've learned playing Galactus is if you have priority, the deck is kind of broken. All right. If you have priority going into your Galactus turn, you're gonna win the game 99% of the time. It's the turns where you have to play around arrow or hope they don't have arrow where you lose. So I love seeing the high statted stuff early to kind of make it a little bit easier for you to get that turn 3 wave. Like you go lizard, wave, you go lizard on the left, wave in the middle, Galactus on the right on turn 4, and because you have 5 power and 3 power, you have priority, and then you just win. It's just a really, really, really good strategy. I love to see it, and I will be playing this Galactus list a whole lot moving forward because I think this looks like the list. The only issue I have with it is it's pretty all in on Galactus. It doesn't have a destroyer or anything like that to sort of set up the null. So if you don't hit Galactus, the null basically does nothing, and that I'm not a huge fan of. But I think the deck's still good. So I will be playing this. I actually played a few games with it on stream. That hopefully the VOD is usable, and I'll be able to post this for you. But definitely worth looking at these decks if you want to try some of them out. I'll make sure and post the Twitter link in my description. So check it out there if you want to see it. Next up, they talked a little bit about ladder and how ladder actually works. So he did mention you will only be matched against infinite players from rank 70 and on. This is good to know. I still don't love that you can be at rank 70 and be playing against infinite players. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the matchmaking would serve a lot better if it more heavily weighed where who you were getting paired against was ranked instead of pairing you against people with your internal MMR. If they're already at infinite and you're at rank 70, you should be playing other people who are trying to do the same thing you are. Because I play different decks at infinite, and I play different decks at rank 90 than I do at rank 70. You know, I switch things up a lot more when I'm at ranks 90 through 100 than I do when I'm at rank 70 and 80. Like rank 70 and 80, I'm just trying to play the thing I'm most comfortable with to get up. But then at ranks 90, if I'm running into a hostile metagame, I switch things around. And all of that should be factored in. Like it's like the only only game like this that I can think of that the matchmaking works like this, where you have people like Educated Collins who even at rank 70 and 80 is only playing against bots because his internal MMR is so high, but he's doing it at the beginning of the month and everybody else around him is also at rank 70 trying to get to infinite. So why is he not playing against those people? And he feels the same way. I love watching Educated Collins. He talks about this all the time, how the matchmaking system is busted. He would much rather play against real people than bots. So it is what it is. Hopefully that's something they're looking at fixing. It's just, I don't know, it's weird. I don't love the way it works currently. The next thing they talked about is he said he wonders if dropping 30 ranks is enough on ladder reset, wonders if going to the bottom but changing it to require the same number of games to hit infinite would be more enjoyable. So this is similar. I come from a Hearthstone background, as anybody on my anybody who's watching this on my channel knows. I have a lot of Hearthstone videos on here. The way Hearthstone works is you start at the bottom, you go all the way to the bottom every month, but based on where you finish, you get a certain number of ranked stars that you get for each win. So if you finished in Legend, you get 10 ranked stars as you start out, and it slowly dwindles down as you get higher on the ladder. I think that would be a really interesting system for them to adopt for Snap, where you start at rank 1 every month, but if you were infinite, you start out with getting 10 cubes for each win, doubles to 20, and then it's each 10 ranks, it goes down, 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 it goes down. I don't know exactly how it would work or what the math would look like, but to me, that honestly would be more fun. For Marvel Snap in particular, I actually hate the way it works on Hearthstone, ironically enough, but I think for Snap, that's a really good way to do it, because that's kind of the whole game's shtick, is this progression and like getting those cubes from a snap, or getting, losing that 4 cube, but then hitting the 8 cube the next time. Like there's like that like emotional like high you get from playing the cube system. So I think that would just be multiplied by having you be able to get more cubes. It's like, oh man, I get 20 cubes if I win this game. That's cool. Like that I think that would be an interesting thing for them to at least experiment with, as long as they stick to what he said and keeping it the same number of games needed to get to infinite. Because that's part of why I ground to infinite when I did, is because I was tired of having to like work so hard to get up there. I wanted to be at rank 70 every month and just be able to go 30 ranks to get infinite. So that's why I made a big effort to get to where I am. I don't want to go all the way from the bottom again. That would suck. So that's my only thought on that. I think it's a good idea. I would love to see them try it. Next up, and I love this point, he says, ego will not be a hot location. Tian dislikes ego. I also dislike ego. Let's keep ego where he belongs. In one every like 3,000 trillion games. That would be ideal. And in fact, they can delete ego. Screw ego. Not a fan. And my least favorite thing is as soon as somebody sees ego, they snap. And it's like, no, like it's too hard to earn cubes. I'm not staying in for a game where I have no control over what happens. So not a fan of ego. That's all I got to say on that. The next point, and I wanted to talk about this real briefly, decks queued are not considered in matchmaking, meaning you queue up Galactus, it does not automatically mean you're going to play against an arrow opponent with arrow in their deck or leech in their deck or whatever. This 100% has to be true. I've always known it to be true. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm not one of those people where the second I queue up Galactus, every opponent I'm playing against is Thanos, Leech, Arrow, Magneto, nonsense, where I'm just can't win a single game because they're always just destroying my combo. It's okay. I know it's just variance, and I know that as humans, we tend to remember the negative more than remember the positive. So you remember the games where you get Leech, arrowed, all that stuff. You don't remember the games where you get them with it. So I know this to be true in my head. It's cool. I'm not gonna lie and say that I don't have that emotional like reaction sometimes of like, oh, this sucks so bad. I hate this. Why do I always queue into these decks when I queue up a Galactus deck? Yes, I've had that reaction in my head, and I know it's wrong, but that's okay. Moving on. He gave some data on like the amount of players at each rank. I thought this was super interesting. They said about only 50% of players actually get to rank 40, which is really interesting. I actually would have thought that would have been higher. I kind of feel like the level that most players get to is like 50, 60, but I'm wrong. So that was interesting to hear. He said only 4 to 5% of players get to rank 80. And one of the other things they said is their goal is, or Tian said he believes 1% of players at Infinite is a good target percentage to have. Like they want people who get to Infinite to be dedicated, talented, strong players. That's something that they aim for. So I thought that was cool to hear. They talked about how MMR is based on both cubes and wins, which I thought was also interesting. One of the things I did want to touch on with all of this, I think this is all really cool, really good information. I don't think they're hitting their target goal right now. If their goal is to have Infinite players be like a very specific, dedicated, strong style of player, I think right now you can get to Infinite like once and then crash your MMR and just have a really easy time getting there every single month, get to Infinite, and then just tank a bunch of games, crash your MMR, and the next month you do the same thing. Like I don't love the way they do the pairing because of the MMR, the internal MMR being factored so heavily. So one of the things I would love to see them do is up the importance of what rank you are in determining matchmaking. If you're always playing against people at rank 90, when you're at rank 90, you're not going to be able to fart around in Infinite, crash your MMR, and then get the Infinite easy every single month. I don't know. That's one thing that I really hope they do change. The whole bot system and then the whole MMR pairing system, I think could use a big rework. I think it would be a lot better if they redid some of how that is factored in. Just my opinion. I know a lot of people share that opinion though, so I want to just go ahead and throw that out there. That's all I really have. That's the total of this today. Like I said, there are a bunch of cool decks included in this. So if you want to see more about those and see what some of those play like, what they look like on Infinite Ladder in Infinite Rank, stay tuned to this channel because I will have some of those coming up later this week. So thanks for hanging out at the Peaceful Sea, and I hope you have a great day.